I always knew my son David was ambitious, but I never imagined his ambition could be so cruel to me. After decades working as an executive secretary at an investment firm, I managed, little by little, to buy 3 apartments in different neighborhoods of Chicago. They weren't mansions, but they were mine, the result of years of saving, overtime hours, and sacrifices I made to give him the best education possible. What David and his wife Jessica didn't know was that I wasn't just his mother. I was also their landlord. And when they told me there was no need to visit anymore, I decided it was time they learned exactly what that independence would cost them. Let me start from the beginning, because this story of calculated revenge began long before that devastating conversation at their front door. I'm Margaret Patterson, 62 years old, and I've spent the last 30 years of my life dedicated to one person above all others, my son David. His father, my husband Robert, died in a car accident when David was only 8 years old. From that moment on, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked as an executive secretary at Morrison & Associates investment firm for 28 years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and it taught me something invaluable: how to handle money, how to invest wisely, and how to build wealth slowly and carefully. While other single mothers struggled to make ends meet, I was learning about real estate markets, mortgage rates, and property investments from the conversations I overheard in the office every day. When David turned 18 and left for Northwestern University on a partial scholarship, the rest I paid for with my savings, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. Instead of spending my empty nest years relaxing, I decided to invest every extra dollar I had into real estate. Chicago was experiencing a housing boom, and I saw an opportunity. My first purchase was a small 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. I put down every penny I had saved, took out a mortgage that terrified me, and became a landlord at the age of 45. I rented it out to a young couple for $1,800 a month, which covered my mortgage and gave me a small profit. That profit went straight into savings for the next property. Over the next 15 years, I was methodical and patient. I studied the market, saved every bonus and overtime payment, and slowly built a small real estate portfolio. By the time David graduated college with his business degree, I owned 3 properties in different neighborhoods: the Lincoln Park apartment, a place in Wicker Park, and a newer unit in the trendy Bucktown area. David had no idea about any of this. To him, I was just his hard-working secretary mother who lived in a modest rental apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I wanted it that way. I had seen too many families torn apart by money, and I didn't want David to feel obligated to me, or, worse, to feel entitled to something he hadn't earned. Everything changed when David met Jessica Hamilton 2.5 years ago. She was a real estate agent, ironic, considering what would happen later, with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and an attitude that made it immediately clear she thought she was slumming it with our middle-class family. The first time David brought her to my apartment for dinner, I watched her survey my modest living room with barely concealed disdain. She made comments about maximizing space potential and suggested I might want to update the decor to something more contemporary. When I served my famous pot roast, the same meal David had requested for every birthday since he was 12, she picked at it delicately and mentioned she was mostly plant-based now. But I held my tongue. David seemed happy, and that was what mattered to me. If Jessica made him smile the way he was smiling, I would learn to accept her quirks and condescension. The wedding planning was my first real glimpse into Jessica's true nature. She made it clear that this was her day, and that everything needed to be perfect. When I offered to help with costs, I had money saved, though they didn't know how much. Jessica practically recoiled. "Oh no, Mrs. Patterson, that's so sweet. But we have everything handled. David and I both have good jobs, and my parents are contributing significantly. We really want this to be independent, you know? Like a celebration of us starting our life together without needing help from anyone." The way she said needing help from anyone felt like a personal slap. But David nodded along, agreeing that they wanted to do everything themselves. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give her that. Expensive, elegant, and completely devoid of any personal touches that reflected David's life before Jessica. It was held at the Palmer House Hotel downtown with 200 guests, most of whom I'd never met. I sat at a table near the back with David's elderly aunt and some family friends, watching my son start his new life with a woman who had already begun erasing his old one. During the reception, I overheard Jessica talking to one of her bridesmaids about apartment hunting. "We're looking at this amazing place in Bucktown," she was saying. "It's exactly what we want, and the rent is surprisingly reasonable for the area. David found it through some property management company. It's like we hit the lottery." I nearly choked on my champagne. They were talking about my Bucktown apartment, the one I had bought specifically with young professionals in mind, the one I had intentionally priced below market rate because the property management company I used had told me David Patterson was interested in viewing it. You see, when David graduated and started looking for an apartment, I had quietly instructed my property manager to reach out to him about the Bucktown place. I had them offer it at $2,000 a month when the market rate was easily $2,800. David thought he had found an incredible deal through his own apartment hunting skills. Jessica thought she had lucked into the perfect starter home for their life together. Neither of them knew that David's needy, overbearing mother was actually subsidizing their entire lifestyle. After the wedding, the distance between David and me began almost immediately. At first, it was subtle. Canceled dinners because Jessica had made other plans, shorter phone calls because they were busy with married life, fewer visits because they were establishing their own traditions. I tried to be understanding. Newlyweds needed space to build their relationship. I had been married once. I remembered those early days when you wanted to create your own little world together. But as weeks turned into months, I began to feel like I was being systematically phased out of my son's life. The calls became purely functional. "Hi, Mom. Just calling to check in. Everything's fine. Jessica says hi. We're really busy this week. I'll call you next Sunday." Click. When I did manage to visit, Jessica's hostility became more apparent. She would answer the door with a forced smile that never reached her eyes, offer me coffee in a tone that suggested she hoped I'd decline, and find reasons to remind David of errands they needed to run or friends they needed to call back. I started noticing other changes in David, too. He stopped mentioning his childhood memories, stopped asking about family stories, stopped calling me by the nickname Mama Bear that he'd used since he was little. It was as if Jessica was systematically rewriting his personal history, editing out anything that came before her. The breaking point came 4 months ago, on a Thursday evening in March. I hadn't heard from David in 2 weeks, which was unusual even by their new standards. I had been calling and texting, getting no response. Finally, worried that something might be wrong, I decided to drive over to their apartment, my apartment, to check on them. I knew they were home because I could see the lights on and hear music playing. When I knocked on the door, it took several minutes for anyone to answer. Finally, Jessica opened it, and her expression when she saw me was one of pure annoyance. "Oh," she said, not moving to let me in, "it's you." "Hello, Jessica. I've been trying to reach David. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she said curtly. "David's in the shower." I waited for her to invite me in, but she just stood there blocking the doorway. Finally, I said, "Could I come in and wait for him? I'd like to talk to him." Jessica sighed heavily, as if I had just asked her to donate a kidney. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to talk." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "Okay," I said. "Can we talk inside?" "No," she said. "I think it's better if we talk out here." David appeared behind her then, his hair still damp from the shower, wearing a Northwestern University t-shirt I had bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. When he saw me, his expression was a mixture of guilt and irritation. "Mom," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "I've been trying to call you for 2 weeks, David." I was worried. Jessica and David exchanged a look. One of those married couple looks that excludes everyone else in the world. David stepped forward, and I noticed he positioned himself slightly in front of Jessica, as if protecting her from me. "Mom, "We need to have an honest conversation," he said. "Jessica and I have been talking, and we feel like you're not respecting our boundaries as a married couple." I felt like I'd been slapped. Boundaries? David, I'm your mother. I haven't seen you in a month, and I've barely spoken to you in 2 weeks. What boundaries am I not respecting? Jessica stepped forward then, and I could see the satisfaction in her eyes as she prepared to deliver what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "Mrs. Patterson, what David is trying to say is that we're adults now. We have our own life, our own routines, our own priorities. We don't need constant check-ins and surprise visits. It's suffocating." "Suffocating?" I repeated, incredulous. "Jessica, I call once a week and visit maybe twice a month. How is that suffocating?" "It's not about frequency," David said, and I could hear Jessica's words coming out of his mouth. "It's about the expectation. You expect us to always be available, always ready to drop everything when you want to see us. That's not how adult relationships work." I stared at my son, this man I had raised alone, put through college, supported through every challenge and disappointment of his life. Adult relationships? David, I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. I just want to be part of your life. "And you are," Jessica said quickly, "but on our terms, when it works for us. We'll call you when we want to get together. We'll invite you when we want company. But this showing up unannounced, these constant calls when we don't answer immediately, it needs to stop." I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of Jessica. "So what are you saying? That I can't call my own son? That I can't visit?" David looked at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. "What we're saying, Mom, is that there's no need to visit anymore. We'll reach out when we want to see you." No need to visit anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there in the hallway of my own building, looking at the son I had devoted my entire adult life to, being told that I was no longer welcome in his life. "David," I said quietly, "do you remember when you were 12 and you broke your arm falling off your bike? You were so scared at the hospital and you made me promise to never leave you?" He finally looked up at me, and for just a moment I saw a flicker of the little boy he used to be. But then Jessica put her hand on his arm, and the moment was gone. "That was a long time ago, Mom," he said. "Things are different now." "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the breaking of my heart. "They certainly are." I turned to walk away, but Jessica's voice stopped me. "Mrs. Patterson, we hope you understand that this isn't personal. It's just what's best for our marriage." I turned back to look at her, this woman who had stolen my son and was now dismissing me like an unwanted solicitor. "Oh, Jessica," I said softly, "it's about to become very personal." I walked back to my apartment, my real apartment, the one I actually lived in, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I made myself a cup of tea and stared out the window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about everything that had just happened. Then I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out the fireproof safe where I kept all my important documents. Property deeds, rental agreements, bank statements, tax records, everything that told the real story of Margaret Patterson's life. I spread the documents out on my kitchen table and looked at them with new eyes. 3 apartments, 3 sources of rental income, 3 pieces of a property empire that my son and his wife knew nothing about. David and Jessica were living in one of them, paying $800 below market rate. Jessica's sister Karen and her husband were living in another one, also getting a significant discount because I had instructed my property manager to help out any friends or family of the Patterson tenant. And the 3rd apartment? That was occupied by Marcus Williams, David's best friend from college, who had gotten an even better deal because David had personally asked me if I knew of any good apartments when Marcus was apartment hunting 2 years ago. I had quietly arranged for him to get the Lincoln Park place at $1,000 to $600 a month when I could have easily rented it for $2,200. I was subsidizing the housing costs for my son, his wife, her sister, and his best friend, and none of them had any idea. To them, I was just a lonely secretary who worked too much and called too often. They had no idea that their comfortable lifestyle was being quietly supported by the woman they were now pushing out of their lives. I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did, and picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Robert Chen, the lawyer who had helped me structure my real estate investments years ago. "Robert?" I said when he answered. "It's Margaret Patterson. I need to schedule a meeting. I want to sell my properties." "All of them?" he asked, surprised. "Margaret, your portfolio is performing very well. The rental income alone is giving you financial security for retirement. Are you sure you want to liquidate everything?" "I'm sure," I said, "but I want to be strategic about it. I need to sell to buyers who will immediately raise the rents to market rates." There was a pause. "Margaret, can I ask why?" I took a sip of wine and smiled for the first time in weeks. "Because, Robert, I'm about to teach some people a very expensive lesson about the cost of independence." The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in 3 years, and spent the day researching real estate investors who specialized in buying rental properties for immediate profit maximization. I found a company called Midwest Property Ventures that had a reputation for purchasing undervalued rentals and quickly bringing them up to market rates. I scheduled a meeting with their acquisitions manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Reeves, who walked through all 3 of my properties with the efficiency of a surgeon. She made quick calculations on her phone and presented me with an offer that was fair, fast, and exactly what I was looking for. "We can close on all 3 properties within 30 days, she said, "and I can guarantee you that we'll be adjusting rental rates immediately. These units are significantly underpriced for their locations and amenities." "How significantly?" I asked. "The Bucktown property could easily rent for $12,800, maybe $3,000 with some minor updates. You're currently getting $2,000. The Lincoln Park apartment is worth at least $2,200, and you're getting $1,600. The Wicker Park place could rent for $2,500, and you're only getting $1,900. I did the math in my head. David and Jessica would see their rent increase by $800 to $1,000 a month. Marcus would face an increase of $600. Karen and her husband would be looking at an extra $600 a month as well. "When would you notify the current tenants?" I asked. "Standard practice is to send notices 30 days after closing, giving them the required 60-day notice of rent increases. So they'd get notification in about 2 months, and the increases would take effect in 4 months. "Perfect," I said. "Let's do it." We shook hands, and I signed a letter of intent that same day. As I walked out of Patricia's office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of control over my own life. But I wasn't done yet. If David and Jessica wanted complete independence from me, they were going to get it, in every possible way. Over the next 2 weeks, while the lawyers processed the sale paperwork, I systematically removed myself from their lives in ways they didn't even know existed. I canceled the supplemental health insurance policy I had been secretly paying for David since he graduated college, a policy that covered expenses his work insurance didn't. I closed the savings account I had been contributing to every month for their future house down payment, transferring the $23,000 I had saved into my own retirement fund. I also called my financial advisor and updated my will, removing David and Jessica as beneficiaries and instead establishing a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing business degrees. Marcus and Karen remained in my will with small bequests. They had been collateral damage in this situation, but they had never been cruel to me. Hey everyone, I'm really curious to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment with your city and country. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. 3 weeks after that devastating conversation at their door, I got the call from Patricia Reeves that the sales had been finalized. All 3 properties now belong to Midwest Property Ventures, and the new management company would be sending out introductory letters to all tenants within a week. I spent that evening cooking myself a nice dinner, salmon with asparagus, something David had always hated but I loved, and opened a bottle of champagne I had been saving for a special occasion. This felt special enough. The first call came 5 days later. It was 8:30 in the morning, and my phone rang while I was getting ready for work. David's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later, and again at lunch, and 3 more times that afternoon. I didn't answer any of them. The calls continued for 3 days. David, then Jessica, then David again. I could see the panic escalating with each missed call, but I didn't engage. I had learned from their example that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Finally, on Thursday evening, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw David standing in my hallway, looking disheveled and desperate. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Mom," he said, slightly out of breath. "Why aren't you answering your phone? We need to talk." "Hello, David," I said calmly. "I thought we had already talked. You made it very clear that there was no need for us to visit anymore." "This is different," he said. "This is about our apartment. We got a letter saying the building was sold and our rent is going up by $900 a month. There has to be some mistake." I leaned against my doorframe and studied my son's face. "What kind of mistake?" "The letter says the previous owner was undercharging rent and they're bringing it up to market rates. But that's impossible. We got a great deal, but it wasn't that great. Market rate would be at least $2,800, and we're only paying $2,000, I finished. "Yes, I know." David stared at me. "How do you know what we pay in rent?" "Because, David, I was your landlord. I owned your apartment. I owned Karen's apartment. I owned Marcus's apartment. And last month, I sold all 3 properties to an investment company that specializes in maximizing rental income." The color drained from David's face. "You... what?" "I owned your apartment building, David. I've been your landlord for 3 years. The great deal you thought you found was me charging you $800 below market rate because you're my son." "That's impossible," he said, but his voice was weak. "You're a secretary. You live in a rental apartment. You drive an old car. You can't afford to own property in Bucktown." I smiled sadly. "David, there's a lot you don't know about me. There's a lot you never bothered to ask. But if you owned our apartment, why didn't you tell us?" "Because I wanted you to feel independent and proud of what you had accomplished. I wanted you to feel like you were making it on your own without knowing that your mother was quietly helping in the background." David was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then, "But why did you sell? Why now?" "Because 3 weeks ago, you and your wife made it very clear that you didn't want me in your life. You said there was no need for me to visit anymore. So I decided to give you exactly what you asked for. Complete independence from me." "But Mom, we didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "You meant every word. Jessica especially meant every word. And that's fine. You're adults, as you reminded me. Adults pay market rent." David's voice became desperate. "Mom, we can't afford $2,900 a month. Jessica's real estate business is still building up, and my salary can't cover that much in rent, plus all our other expenses." "Then I suggest you find a less expensive apartment," I said. "I hear there are some nice places available in the suburbs." "But this is our home. We've lived there for 3 years. It was your home when I owned it and wanted you to be comfortable. Now it's just an overpriced rental that you can't afford." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when he was frustrated. "Mom, please, there has to be something we can work out. Can't you buy it back?" "I could," I said, "but I won't." "Why not?" I looked at my son, this man I had loved unconditionally for 30 years, and felt my heart break one more time. "Because, David, you taught me that love without respect is worthless. You and Jessica made it clear that I was an inconvenience in your life, a problem to be managed, so I'm solving the problem by removing myself completely. That's not what we meant. It's exactly what you meant, and now you get to live with the consequences." I started to close the door, but David put his hand out to stop me. "Mom, wait. What about Karen? What about Marcus? They're getting evicted too because of this." I felt a pang of guilt about Karen and Marcus, but I pushed it aside. "David, you should have thought about the consequences before you decided to push me out of your life. Actions have ripple effects. That's a lesson you apparently needed to learn. But they didn't do anything wrong. Neither did I said quietly. But that didn't stop you from punishing me. David stood there for a moment, tears in his eyes. So what now? We lose everything? You don't lose everything, I said. You lose the subsidized lifestyle you didn't know you had, and you lose the mother you decided you didn't want. But you still have each other, and you still have your independence. That's what you wanted, right? I closed the door before he could answer. Over the next week, the phone calls multiplied. David called 17 times the first day after our conversation. Jessica called and left increasingly desperate voicemails. Karen called crying, explaining that she and her husband couldn't afford the rent increase on their teacher salaries. Marcus called confused and hurt, asking what he had done wrong. I didn't answer any of them, but Jessica's voicemails were particularly illuminating. The first one was angry. Mrs. Patterson, I don't know what game you're playing, but this is ridiculous. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're mad about a conversation. The second one was bargaining. Mrs. Patterson, maybe we can work something out. David and I have been talking and we realize we might have been too harsh. Can we meet for coffee and discuss this? The third one was desperate. Please, Mrs. Patterson, I'm pregnant. We just found out and we were going to tell you this weekend. We can't afford to move right now, not with a baby coming. Please call me back. That last voicemail almost broke my resolve. A grandchild. David was going to be a father, and I was going to be a grandmother. But then I remembered Jessica's face when she told me there was no need to visit anymore, and I stayed strong. If they wanted me in their life, they would have to prove it with more than just desperation driven by financial necessity. 2 weeks later, I was leaving work when I saw David's car parked outside my building. He was leaning against it, obviously waiting for me. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping well. Mom, he said as I approached, please, just give me 5 minutes. I stopped walking but didn't move closer. 5 minutes. We found a new apartment, he said. It's smaller, it's further from the city, and it costs more than we were paying you, even with the increase. Jessica had to take a job at a corporate real estate firm that she hates, and I'm working overtime every week just to make ends meet. That sounds like a difficult adjustment, I said without emotion. Karen and Bob had to move in with her parents. They lost their apartment and their independence because of this. I felt another stab of guilt, but I didn't respond. Marcus broke up with Hannah because they couldn't afford to live together anymore. He's living with 3 roommates in a place that's half the size of what he had. David, what do you want me to say? I want you to tell me how to fix this, he said, his voice breaking. I want you to tell me what I have to do to make this right. I looked at my son, and for a moment, I softened. David, do you know what the hardest part of this whole situation has been for me? What? It's not that you chose Jessica over me. It's not that you wanted space in your marriage. It's that you were willing to throw away 30 years of unconditional love for someone who convinced you that your mother was a burden to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. David's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. But I can't undo what I said. All I can do is try to make it right going forward. How? I asked. How do you make right the fact that you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't welcome in your life anymore? How do you make right the fact that you let your wife treat me like an inconvenience for 2 years without ever standing up for me? How do you make right the fact that it took a financial crisis for you to realize you need me? David wiped his eyes. I don't know, but I want to try. I studied his face, looking for something. Sincerity, maybe, or genuine remorse rather than desperation. What I saw was a man who was sorry he was suffering consequences, not a man who was sorry for the pain he had caused. David, I said finally, if I hadn't owned your apartments, if this financial crisis hadn't happened, would you ever have called me? Would you ever have realized you were wrong? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, honestly, I don't know. That's what I thought, I said. You're not sorry for what you did to me, David. You're sorry it's costing you money. That's not true. isn't it? If I called you right now and said I would buy back all 3 apartments and restore everyone's old rent, would you still want to work on our relationship? Or would you go back to the way things were before? David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. His silence was answer enough. I thought so, I said. David, I spent 30 years of my life putting you first. I worked extra hours to pay for your college. I went without things I wanted so you could have things you needed. I built a financial portfolio specifically so I could help you without you feeling indebted to me. And when you were ready to start your adult life, I quietly made sure you had every advantage I could give you. I know, Mom. I know you sacrificed for me. But you didn't know I was still sacrificing for you. You didn't know that I was paying for your health insurance, or saving money for your future house, or subsidizing your rent. You thought you were completely independent, and that made it easy for you to push me away. What do you want me to do? He asked desperately. I looked at my son one last time. I want you to live the independent life you said you wanted. I want you to handle your own problems, pay your own bills, and make your own way in the world without any help from your needy, overbearing mother. But what about the baby? What about your grandchild? That question hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. What about it, David? You and Jessica made it clear that you would decide when and if you wanted me in your life. So if you want me to be part of this baby's life, you'll have to prove that you actually want me there, not just that you need my financial support. How do I prove that? I don't know, I said honestly. But I know that showing up here because you need money isn't proof of anything except desperation. I started walking toward my building, but David called after me. Mom, what if we apologize? What if Jessica apologizes? What if we promise to do better? I turned back to him. David, Jessica spent 2 years treating me like an unwanted intruder in your life. She convinced you that loving your mother was a sign of immaturity. She made it clear that she saw me as competition for your attention rather than someone who wanted you to be happy. An apology doesn't undo that damage. But people can change. Can they? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, Jessica is only sorry because it's costing her money. If I hadn't owned your apartment, she'd still be perfectly happy with me being out of your life. David stood there in the street, looking lost and defeated. So that's it? You're just going to cut us out forever? No, David. I'm not cutting you out. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. You wanted independence from me, and now you have it. You wanted to be treated like adults who could handle their own problems, and now you are being treated that way. You wanted a life where you didn't have to deal with an overbearing mother, and now you have that life. But we need you. You need my money, I corrected. There's a difference. I walked into my building and didn't look back. 6 months have passed since that conversation. David has called a few times, usually late at night when I assume Jessica is asleep. I listen to his voicemails, but I don't call back. He tells me about the pregnancy, about how they're preparing for the baby, about how much he misses me. But he never addresses the real issue. He never acknowledges that the problem wasn't that I was overbearing, but that Jessica was manipulative, and he was weak enough to let her convince him to choose between his wife and his mother. Jessica sent me a long letter about 3 months ago. It was beautifully written, full of apologies and explanations about how she was insecure about my relationship with David, how she felt threatened by the bond we shared, how she realizes now that she was wrong to try to come between us. She asked me to forgive her and to be part of their child's life. I returned the letter unopened, because here's what Jessica and David don't understand. This was never about money. The money was just the mechanism that revealed who they really were when they thought there were no consequences for their actions. Jessica showed me that she was willing to isolate my son from his family to make herself feel more secure in her marriage. David showed me that 30 years of love and sacrifice could be discarded the moment it became inconvenient for his new life. The money I lost by selling those apartments at below-market prices to investors? That was worth it to learn the truth about who my son had become and what my place in his life really was. I've used the proceeds from the sales to travel, something I never had time for when I was constantly worrying about David's well-being. I've been to Italy, where I learned to make real pasta from a grandmother in Tuscany. I went to Ireland and traced some of my family genealogy. Next month, I'm going to Japan with a tour group of other women my age. I've made new friends, people who appreciate my company for who I am, not what I can provide for them. I've started taking pottery classes and learned that I'm actually quite good at it. I've begun volunteering at a literacy program for adult learners, and I find it incredibly fulfilling to help people achieve goals they set for themselves. Do I miss David? Every single day. Do I think about the grandchild I may never meet? Every single night. Do I regret standing up for myself and refusing to be taken for granted? Never. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the full consequences of their choices. Sometimes the only way people learn to value what they have is to lose it completely. David wanted to be independent from his overbearing mother. Jessica wanted a husband who would prioritize her over everyone else, including the woman who raised him. They both got exactly what they wanted, and sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't anger or retaliation. It's simply giving people exactly what they asked for and letting them live with the results. If you've made it this far in my story, I want to thank you for listening. If you've ever felt taken for granted by family members, I want you to know that you deserve better. Love should be mutual, respect should be given freely, and no one should have to beg for a place in their loved one's life. If you found this story meaningful, or if it resonated with your own experiences, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like mine, stories of people who found the strength to walk away from relationships that had become one-sided, stories of people who chose self-respect over family obligation. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to force someone to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Sometimes the most powerful word you can say is no. And sometimes the most liberating action you can take is to simply walk away and build a life that doesn't revolve around people who don't appreciate your presence. I learned that I had spent so many years defining myself as David's mother that I had forgotten who Margaret Patterson was as an individual. These past 6 months have been a journey of rediscovering myself, not as someone's mother or someone's employee, but as a woman with her own dreams, interests, and value. The hardest part wasn't losing David. It was realizing that I'd allowed myself to become so small in my own life that I was willing to accept crumbs of affection from people who should have been grateful for my love. 3 weeks ago, something interesting happened. I was at my pottery class when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the message later, it was from Marcus. "Aunt Margaret," his voice said, and I could hear the emotion in it. "I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us, but I needed to call. I finally understand what happened, and I'm so sorry." David told me everything, about the apartments, about what he and Jessica said to you, about how you've been helping all of us for years without us knowing. He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "I just wanted you to know that what they did to you was wrong. You didn't deserve that. And I wanted to thank you for everything you did for me, even though I never knew to thank you before. You gave me a chance to build a life in Chicago. And even though I lost the apartment, I'll never forget what you did for me." There was another pause. And then, "I also wanted you to know that I've been thinking about you every day since this happened. Not because of money or apartments, but because I miss you. I miss our conversations, I miss your advice. I miss feeling like I had a family here in Chicago. If you ever want to have coffee or just talk, I'll be here. No expectations, no agenda. I miss my Aunt Margaret." I listened to that voicemail 3 times, and each time I felt something crack in the wall I had built around my heart. Marcus hadn't called because he needed something. He had called because he valued me as a person, not as a provider. A week later, I called him back. We met at a small cafe in his new neighborhood, a considerably less trendy area than where he used to live, but he seemed genuinely happy. He had found 2 roommates who were actually close friends now, and he was dating someone new who, according to him, was nothing like Hannah and actually appreciates the simple things in life. "Aunt Margaret," he said when he saw me, and he hugged me tight. "I've missed you so much." We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his new job, a promotion he had earned at his marketing firm, and his new girlfriend Sarah, who was a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could light up a room. He showed me pictures of the ceramics class he had started taking, inspired, he said, by something David had mentioned about me learning pottery, and he asked about my travels with genuine interest and enthusiasm. Most importantly, he apologized. Not the desperate, self-serving apology I had gotten from David and Jessica, but a real acknowledgement of how he had taken me for granted. "I never realized how much you did for me," he said. "And I don't just mean the apartment, I mean all of it. The birthday flowers, the check-in calls, the way you always remembered things that were important to me. I treated you like you were just David's mom instead of seeing you as someone special in my own life." "Marcus," I said, "you were never cruel to me. You were always respectful and kind." "But I was passive," he said. "When Jessica would make those snide comments about you, I never said anything. When David started pulling away from you, I never told him he was making a mistake. I just went along with it because it was easier than getting involved." He was right, and his honesty meant more to me than any apology David had offered. "Can we start over?" he asked. "Not because I need anything from you, but because I genuinely want you in my life." I looked at this young man who had been part of my extended family for 5 years, and I realized that some relationships could be repaired if both people were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and do the work. "I'd like that," I said. Marcus and I have had coffee 3 times since then, and each time feels natural and genuine. He brings me pictures of his pottery attempts, terrible but enthusiastic, and I tell him about my travels. He's introduced me to Sarah, who is indeed delightful and who treats me like a beloved aunt rather than an obligation. It's a different relationship than we had before, more honest, more intentional, more mutual. And it's shown me that it is possible to rebuild trust when both people are committed to doing better. Karen has reached out a few times as well. Her messages are more complicated than Marcus's. She's genuinely sorry, but she's also still dealing with the financial consequences of the rent increase. She and her husband Bob eventually found a small apartment they could afford, but she had to leave her teaching job at the private school she loved and take a position at a public school that pays better but has larger class sizes and more challenging conditions. I feel guilty about Karen's situation, but I also recognize that she made her own choices. She could have spoken up when Jessica was being cruel to me. She could have maintained her own relationship with me, independent of her sister's influence. She chose not to, and while I don't think she deserved the financial hardship she experienced, I also can't undo the consequences of decisions that affected multiple people. I did send her a small check to help with her moving expenses, along with a note explaining that while I couldn't change what had happened, I didn't want her to suffer unnecessarily for her sister's behavior. She sent back a grateful note and an invitation to visit whenever I wanted, but we haven't met in person yet. Maybe someday we will. David continues to call occasionally, but the conversations are different now. He's no longer angry or desperate. He seems to have accepted that his actions have consequences he can't simply apologize away. His calls are updates about his life. The baby is due in 2 months. They've moved to a smaller apartment in a suburb I've never heard of. Jessica is on bed rest because of complications with the pregnancy. He doesn't ask me to come back anymore. He doesn't beg me to forgive Jessica or to be part of the baby's life. He just talks to me like I'm someone he used to know well and misses having conversations with. "Mom," he said in his last call, "I know I can't undo what I did, and I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that I think about you every day. I think about all the things you did for me that I never appreciated, and I think about the man I used to be before I let Jessica convince me that needing my mother was a weakness." There was a long pause, and then, "I'm going to be a father soon, and I keep thinking about how I would feel if my child treated me the way I treated you. It makes me sick to my stomach." "David," I said quietly, "what do you want me to say to that?" "Nothing," he said. "I don't want you to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost, and I understand that it's my fault I lost it." Those conversations are hard. Part of me wants to forgive him, to rush over to his new apartment and help him prepare for fatherhood. But I've learned to distinguish between love and enabling, between forgiveness and allowing myself to be taken advantage of. I love my son. I will always love my son. But love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the lessons I've learned about my own worth. Last week, I made a decision that surprised even me. I hired a private investigator to do a background check on David's new address and situation. Not because I want to interfere in his life, but because I want to understand who my son has become without my influence. The report was enlightening. David and Jessica are struggling financially, but they're making it work. Jessica left her high-end real estate job and is working for a more modest firm that specializes in first-time homebuyers. David has taken on a weekend job delivering food to supplement his income. They're living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood, driving used cars and shopping at discount stores. But here's the interesting part. According to the investigator, their neighbors describe them as a quiet, polite couple who help elderly residents with grocery shopping and who organized a community food drive for local families in need. Jessica volunteers at a free clinic on weekends, and David has been coaching a youth basketball team at the local community center. In other words, they've become better people since losing the comfortable lifestyle I was subsidizing. The financial pressure forced them to connect with their community, to contribute to something larger than themselves, to find meaning in service rather than consumption. They've learned to live within their means, to appreciate what they have, and to give back to others who have less. I'm not sure how to feel about this information. Part of me is proud that David is using this experience to grow as a person. Part of me is still hurt that it took losing my support for him to learn these lessons. And part of me wonders if this growth is permanent, or if he would revert to his old patterns if his circumstances improved. But mostly, I'm relieved. I was afraid that my actions had destroyed my son, that I had ruined his life out of spite and pride. Instead, it seems like I may have saved him from becoming someone he wouldn't like very much. Next month, I'm leaving for a 3-week trip to New Zealand. I've always wanted to see the landscapes from the Lord of the Rings movies, and I found a travel group specifically for women over 60 who want to explore the country's natural beauty and cultural heritage. When I come back, I'm thinking about selling my current apartment and buying a small house in one of Chicago's up-and-coming neighborhoods. Something with a garden where I can grow vegetables and flowers, something with enough space for a pottery studio, something that reflects who I am now rather than who I was when I was just David's mother. I'm also considering a major career change. After 28 years as a secretary, I think I might be ready for something new. I've been looking into real estate licensing, ironic given everything that's happened, because I realized through my property investments that I have a good eye for market trends and property values. The idea of helping other people find homes, of using my knowledge to guide first-time buyers through the process, appeals to me. It would be a way to use my skills and experience to help people achieve their dreams, rather than enabling people who take my help for granted. I'm 58 years old, and for the first time in 30 years, I'm making decisions based on what I want rather than what other people need from me. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Will I ever have a relationship with my grandchild? I don't know. Will David and I ever repair our relationship? Maybe, if he continues to grow, and if he can prove that his remorse is genuine rather than situational. But I've learned that I can't build my happiness around other people's choices. I can only control my own actions, my own standards, and my own boundaries. I spent 30 years teaching David that love meant never having expectations, never demanding respect, never standing up for myself when I was being mistreated. I taught him that he could take my support for granted because I would always be there, no matter how he treated me. It took losing him to realize that I had been teaching him the wrong lessons about love, about family, and about how to treat people who care about you. Real love requires mutual respect. Real family relationships require effort from both sides. And real support means sometimes letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when it's painful to watch. I don't know what the future holds for David and me, but I know that whatever relationship we might have in the future will be built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine appreciation rather than obligation, guilt, and financial dependence. And if that's not possible, then I'm prepared to live with that outcome. Because I've learned that it's better to be alone and respected than to be surrounded by people who take you for granted. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to realize what they've lost. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't appreciate your presence. I'm Margaret Patterson. I'm 58 years old. I own my own home. I travel the world. I'm learning new skills, and I'm building relationships with people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. And for the first time in 30 years, that's enough. Until next time, remember, you are worth more than being someone's convenient backup plan. You deserve to be chosen, not settled for. And you have the right to remove yourself from situations where you're not valued, even if those situations involve people you love. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe for more stories about people who chose self-respect over family obligation, and people who learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go.